Welcome back to the masterclass, everyone. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here for part 111 of our 150-part inpatient DRG deep dive. In part 110, we tackled the intricacies of MDC-17, diving into surgical procedures for lymphoma, leukemia, and myeloproliferative disorders. But today, we're shifting gears. We are diving headfirst into one of the most critical, complex, and heavily audited areas in the entire inpatient coding landscape, and that is Major Diagnostic Category 18. So let's get right to work and decode this together. Real quick, before we jump into the heavy technical content today, if you are enjoying this lesson, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel, and share it with friends for this free course on Decode Healthcare with Harshal. Your support is literally what keeps this masterclass going, so thank you. All right, let's take a quick look at today's syllabus. We'll be starting with an MDC-18 overview, then moving into high-volume DRGs, covering sepsis clinical validation, discussing audit defense, and finishing up with a summary and teaser for next time. Let's kick things off with Section 1, Overview of MDC-18, which covers infectious and parasitic diseases. Now, you might be thinking, well, I code infections all the time in other MDCs, and you absolutely do. But MDC-18 is the specialized home for severe systemic infectious crises that lack a single organ-specific principal diagnosis. Structurally, we partition MDC-18 based on interventions. On the medical side, we have DRG logic covering systemic infections, viral illnesses, and fevers of unknown origin. Then, on the surgical side, the DRG logic handles major operating room procedures for these diseases. For today's explainer, our focus is squarely on mastering those medical pathways. Moving right along to Section 2, High-Volume Medical MDC-18DRG Families. Let's examine these closely. Let's break down the MSDRG groupings you really need to commit to memory. First up, we have post-operative and systemic infections, falling into MSDRGs 853 through 855. This is exactly where you're going to route severe systemic bacteremia, gram-negative or gram-positive sepsis without a localized organ assignment, MRSA septicemia, and catheter-related bloodstream infections. Next, we have viral illnesses in DRGs 865 through 867. For these, think severe influenza with systemic complications, acute HIV-related illnesses, or arboviral infections like dengue. We've also got other fungal and parasitic diseases, like candidemia or malaria, mapping to blocks 856 through 858. And finally, sitting in its own completely unique space, we have MSDRG 864 for fever of unknown origin. And speaking of fever of unknown origin, or FUO, I need to be super clear here. This isn't just a catch-all code for a patient who feels a bit warm. Not at all. Classical FUO diagnostic criteria actually demand a temperature greater than 38.3 degrees Celsius, persisting for more than 3 weeks without an identified source, even after a thorough inpatient investigation. You simply cannot just slap an FUO code on a chart because of vague fever documentation. It requires a rigorous, fully documented clinical workup. All right, let's dive right into Section 3. High-yield CDI and clinical validation. We really need to clearly define the difference between explicit sepsis and implicit sepsis here. You cannot just assume sepsis because you see an infection and organ dysfunction happening at the same time in the chart. For example, if a provider documents pneumonia with acute kidney injury and elevated lactic acid, that is implicit. It might look exactly like sepsis clinically, but for coding purposes, you must raise a CDI query. You can only code sepsis when the provider explicitly documents the actual words sepsis, severe sepsis, or septic shock. So remember, never assume, always clarify. So when you're reviewing a chart for implicit sepsis to trigger that query, what exactly are you looking for? Well, you're scanning for a body temperature of 101 degrees Fahrenheit, tachypnea over 20 breaths per minute, tachycardia over 90 beats per minute, and the administration of broad-spectrum antimicrobials. It's also super vital to understand the evolution of sepsis definitions. The older sepsis 2 criteria relied heavily on these Sears indicators plus an infectious source. However, auditors are increasingly looking for modern sepsis 3 criteria. That focuses on a SOFA score increase of 2 or more points, which indicates acute organ dysfunction, and a lactate level greater than 2 millimoles per liter. Your queries really need to reflect these modern clinical markers if they're going to hold up in an audit. Once sepsis is actually confirmed, there is an exact 3-step sequencing logic you must follow. And guys, this logic is completely non-negotiable. Step 1, identify the underlying infection, for instance, A41.51 for sepsis due to E. coli. Step 2, if severe sepsis or septic shock is present, you add the severe sepsis code, like R65.20 or R65.21. And step 3, you code the specific acute organ dysfunction, such as acute kidney failure. So if a patient has sepsis due to E. coli with acute kidney injury, your sequencing is A41.51, followed by R65.20, followed by N17.9. Let's transition over to Section 4, Payer Audit Denial Defense Strategies. Let's see how we protect our cases. I want you to think about this number, 1.9015. That is the relative weight of MS-DRG 871, which is septicemia or severe sepsis with a major complication or comorbidity. The massive takeaway here is that capturing the specificity of an MC, like septic shock, acute tubular necrosis, or diabetic ketoacidosis, can more than double the relative weight and reimbursement of the claim compared to a lower-tier DRG. This huge financial swing is exactly why commercial auditors aggressively scrutinize these cases. They're often trying to downgrade them to an uncomplicated localized infection or just dismissing them as SARS. Your clinical validation must be absolutely bulletproof to survive that. And to make your cases bulletproof, you need fully compliant queries. Here is a great example of a perfectly constructed, non-leading multiple-choice query. You'd write, reviewing documentation of A41.9 sepsis and clinical indicators including a lactate of 4.0, please clarify 1. Septic shock, 2. Severe sepsis, 3. Sepsis with no organ failure, 4. Other, or 5. No change to current documentation. This works beautifully because it provides all clinically reasonable options, it links directly to the clinical evidence, and most importantly, it gives the physician the option to say no change without triggering a compliance violation for leading the provider. This is exactly how you secure your acute organ dysfunction specificity ethically and accurately. Okay, bringing us to Section 5, Summary and Next Steps. Let's quickly recap the absolute golden rule of this explainer. If sepsis is present on admission and is the primary reason for admission, the systemic sepsis code, like A41.9, must be sequenced as the principal diagnosis, period. Even if you know the localized source, like a urinary tract infection, the sepsis code goes first, driving the DRG, and the localized infection is coded secondary. Mastering the sequencing rule is the absolute key to conquering MDC-18. Well, that brings us to the end. If you are enjoying this lesson, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel and share it with friends for this free course on Decode Healthcare with Harshal. Next time, we're tackling Part 112, where we'll cross the partition and explore the surgical procedures for MDC-18. Just think about it. How do major surgical interventions change the entire DRG equation when a patient is already battling a systemic infectious crisis? It completely rewrites the rules. You definitely won't want to miss it. Keep studying, and I'll see you in the next lesson.